It's my pleasure to introduce Tiffani Dixon. She is a graduate from the University of Tennessee in Child Development and Early Childhood Education. She has worked in the early childhood field for almost 20 years as a mentor teacher, director, and developmental therapist. She has focused her work on special education, mental health and addiction, substance exposure in infants and toddlers, and sensory processing disorder. Tiffani works at Emory Valley Center as an early interventionist with children 0 to 3 that have qualified for TEIS services with a developmental delay or disability. You guys are in for such a treat. And Tiffani, welcome.
Thank you. All right. I am really excited to do this presentation. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'm hoping that I can instill some information with you and some strategies to try at home. Is everyone in here, raise your hand if you are familiar with sensory processing. Oh, wow, that's awesome. Okay, well, not awesome that we're so familiar with it, but awesome that you are familiar with what it is. That kind of gives me an idea of like how much time I need to spend on giving you a dictionary name for sensory processing. So sensory processing is something that I talk about that is an invisible disability. It's something that you can't see. It's something that when your child has a sensory processing challenge and they are in a grocery store and they're feeling very overwhelmed and they start to have that meltdown, nobody can see that there's something that this child has challenges with. It's a lot easier to have a little bit more sympathy when your child has a hearing aid. You can see that hearing aid. You can see the child that may have braces on their legs, but sensory processing is one of those invisible disabilities. So that sometimes makes it even more challenging that when you're going out in public and you're seeing other families and you feel like they're judging you because your child has some sensory concerns. And I have experienced that because my child has sensory processing disorder. That's one of the reasons why I love talking about this, so I can instill some information with you and share some strategies. I like to talk about sensory processing as a traffic jam. So there's something going on in the brain where the environment and the child's sensory system are just not matching up. It's like a traffic jam. So things are getting mixed, things are getting missed. Sometimes they're not hearing the words you're saying. Sometimes they're not feeling your touch. So that can make things also very challenging. Sensory processing is also a neurological disorder, so it's something that the child was born with. We don't really have a 100% reason why a child may have sensory processing. There are some correlation like autism, prematurity, drug exposure, in utero trauma that the mother may have gone through while she was pregnant, but there's no definite reason why a child may have sensory processing and why they may not. So we know all of our senses. We learn that pretty much in kindergarten, that we have, you can see, you can taste, you can smell, you can hear, and touch, but there's also some invisible parts of your sensory system. Is anyone familiar with some of these that I've labeled up here? Proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. Is anybody familiar with that one? Those? Okay. I know these guys are. So this is one of my families on my caseload. His little picture, their son, is going to be on here because we have talked a lot about sensory challenges because it really does kind of encompass everything, right? So sleep, your social skills, your ability to even eat sometimes. So there's a lot of things that go on with that sensory system. And the big three that I want to cover today are the proprioception, which is how your body is aware of it in space. Do you have body awareness? And muscle sensation. That's going to sound really weird, but we're gonna go over that. The vestibular part of your sensory system is also how you move, how you have balance and coordination. And basically, it's that you can stand up and feel your body standing up. I have a child that has some problems with her vestibular sensory system, and every time she goes to put her hand in her pocket, she falls over and falls down because she can't really feel what's in her pocket without going off balance. And interoception is signals from your internal organs. So feeling hungry, feeling tired, feeling thirsty. All of those things are part of your interoception. Children that have problems with this particular part of their sensory system are going to be more challenging to potty train, unfortunately, because they're not having those internal signals that my bladder is full, I need to go to the bathroom. So yes, I've listed some of the other possible causes for when we see children that have sensory processing. Even a muscle tone difference. So children that have, I don't know if you are familiar with the term like high muscle tone, so children that are really stiff and rigid in their movements, or a child that's on the other end of that who's very loose, low muscle tone. That's my daughter, the one that's very limp, like a rag doll. So that's also a central nervous system disorder. So more than likely, if a child has muscle tone differences, they may also have sensory processing. So two terms you may hear a lot is sensory seeking or sensory avoiding. So sensory seeking, I feel like is a green light. So you're seeking something out. You're seeking motion, you're seeking texture, you're seeking feeling where your body is. So you may be seeking like leaning up against someone all the time, putting your legs on something all the time, constantly moving. You're seeking something. Sensory avoiding would be those children that, oh, I can't stand the sound of that. I'm going to run away from it. It's a big stop sign. I don't like the way that feels. I don't like the way that sounds. I don't like the way that tastes. So those are like the biggies. You're going to avoid something or you're going to seek something. What sensory avoiding looks like. A lot of covering your ears. Maybe you don't like loud sounds. That would be an example of something that happened to us. We went into a party store one time and they were blowing up balloons, and I had no idea that that was going to cause a meltdown in the middle of the store, because that sound of zzz, of that really loud helium being blown in a balloon caused my daughter to have a panic, and I didn't have her headphones. I didn't know, it just was one of those moments where I'm like, I didn't expect this to happen, but now I'm really aware of that. Avoiding refusing to wear certain clothes. That's a biggie that we see children that have sensory processing challenges. They only want to wear a specific type of shoe, or they don't want to wear shoes at all. They don't want to wear socks because the tags and the strings on the inside is bothering them. They don't want to eat specific foods. I have a lot of children that will skip feeding themselves with their hands and go straight to using a fork because they don't have to actually touch the food. They can just stab it with a fork and eat it. Hates being barefoot on grass. That's sometimes one of the first things I'll see if we go do a visit outside and we're sitting in the grass and that child brings those feet up and they don't want to touch the grass. They don't want to sit in it. They may start to cry. That's one of those things where, oh, what's going on with your sensory system right now? Is that a little too much? Is that too overwhelming for you? Low pain tolerance is something that we don't talk a lot about, but being very, very sensitive to pain, like a tiny little paper cut, or hurting your knee when you're outside and falling down and scraping it. It just seems like the end of the world. They are very overwhelmed with pain. And then we have our sensory seekers. Those are the children that have no pain tolerance almost, to where they don't feel pain at all. That can be pretty dangerous if you have a child who is a sensory seeker, because they may also take a lot of risks. They may not understand that jumping off of something and crashing, really high up can hurt their body, because they don't feel the pain, so there's not a logical consequence there of getting hurt. I have a little boy on my caseload that he is probably the most extreme, not having any sensation of pain, to where he broke his femur and we didn't know for like days until he finally just stopped walking because he didn't know. I mean, we took him to the ER and he, wasn't crying. The doctors were like, nothing's wrong with this kid. If he broke his femur, we would know because he'd be crying. That's not always the case. So these are kids that it can be very, very extreme too, where they don't feel pain. There's a lot of squirming and fidgeting. They play really rough. These are the type of children that may come up to give you a hug and they put you in a chokehold and you don't really quite realize, like, why are you choking me? Just give me a hug. They don't feel how tight a grip that they're holding on to you. The ones who really like to horseplay, they like to be rough, they like to tackle their friends in the classroom, they like to run and tackle their cousins until they're crashing down on the floor. They're not misbehaving, they are having a hard time with their sensory seeking. So a question I get very often, can you be a seeker and an avoider? Yes, you can. You can, and that's what's so fun about sensory processing is that it can go here, it can go there, and it can also change. That's fun too. So I like to call it the sensory roller coaster because you may finally have figured out like, oh, this is what they need. I need to do this. And then 6 months later, like, oh, bath time used to calm them and now it hypes them up. So things can change over time. So knowing that and being prepared for that, I think is very helpful of a mindset to know this isn't always changing things. So things that they used to avoid may be something that they're seeking later on down the road. I'm going to send you all of these slides. I'm going to just load you up with handouts. So all of the stuff that you're going to see on here, you're going to have a copy of it. So don't worry about that. I like to call this part being a sensory detective. So especially when I'm talking to teachers in a classroom of a child that has some sensory challenges, it's a lot about being a detective and finding out what's going on that this child is either seeking or avoiding, and how can we help them? What is something that we can do to help them feel regulated? So regulated means that your sensory systems are basically a little bit calmer. When you're in that calm state, then you can actually hear what someone is saying to you. You can actually learn things. So if a lot of the times if I come into a home and I see a child bouncing off the walls and they're having a hard time sitting down and mom is saying, no, stop, and they don't hear that at all and they're just running, there may be something going on with that sensory system. They're not hearing what we're saying because their system is so dysregulated that we need to bring it down, calm our bodies just a little bit, and then that learning will start to happen. A lot of the times those children will also have a speech delay because they're so busy on the go and jumping and climbing and rolling around that they may have a hard time hearing what we're saying, which we know that you have to hear to be able to learn some language and how to communicate. If you are seeing some of these things and you're not familiar with sensory processing, we need to get you an OT evaluation. So it looks like a lot of people in here are familiar with sensory processing, but if this is new to you, if this is a new topic and you're like, oh wow, that's my child, that's a lot of the things, like I didn't know that was something that other people are experiencing, then we need to be talking about getting an OT evaluation, occupational therapy. So your occupational therapist would be someone who helps you find equipment. And that's what's so great about Friends of Tennessee is that we are in great contact with TEIS and early intervention altogether is a wonderful umbrella because we can talk to each other and help find some resources for our families that may need some equipment for some of these sensory challenges. So proprioception, this is the biggie I said I wanted to talk about. This is your organizing sense of your body. This is how your muscles and your joints talk to your brain. That sounds really weird. I get a lot of like, huh? I don't understand what that means. It's basically the receptors that are receiving signals through your body. So when a child is sensory seeking and they're climbing and they're jumping and they're crashing and it's hard to get them to settle down, they're seeking that in their body. They're not getting enough of that. So that's probably part of their proprioception. So what that looks like when they're dysregulated is that they're very hyperactive. We talked about before, they're too much force or even too little force. Space invaders, those are the ones that are just always on you. Mommy needs a break. Personal space here, like you need to sit beside me instead of on my lap. Or if you're gonna sit here, you can sit up, but you can't push against me the whole time. Those are space invaders. Your toe walkers, do we have any toe walkers in here? Yeah, those ones that are always up on those tippy toes walking around. That's usually a sensory response, is that they're trying to put all of their sensation up on those tippy toes to get more input in their body. So that's why we see a lot of toe walking. And squeezing into tight spaces. This is one of my kids on my caseload that the mom would always say, "You've never seen anything like this before." With sensory processing, we've pretty much seen it all. This kid would love to get in and squeeze in between the cushions in his couch. All you can see is his little head sticking out because he loved to squeeze in to that tight space. And then he would get the phone, and she was like, "I don't understand. Like, why does he only want to watch things like Little Einstein or Cocomelon?" Because that visual stimulation was also calming his body down. So between the tight squeezes and hearing that calming music and seeing it visually was the only thing that he would do to calm himself down, so he was regulated. So basically any of those things that you see where I say it's kind of quirky, where you're like, you do that head tilt and you're like, that's different. I've not seen other kids do that, or that's very unique with my child. Or if I'm having a babysitter come over and I have to tell them, oh, it's okay for him to squeeze underneath the cushions or squeeze behind the couch, like that's what he likes. Any of those little tidbits where you're just like, that's different, that's probably a sensory response. So some things we talk about for children that have challenges with their proprioception. So if this sounds like your child or this sounds like someone you work with, this is something that can help, is what we call heavy work activities. So heavy work is basically we're going to make that child use their joints and their muscles to where they feel their body. So when they like to climb, if they're climbing all the time, we may add weight to their body as they're climbing, because that's going to add more pressure to their joints and their muscles. If they're running up and down the hallway, we may put a backpack on them with some water bottles in it, because that's going to weigh them down. When you go to the grocery store and they're running everywhere and you're having, come back, because they're not going to sit in the grocery cart, right? They're going to want to run. You're going to have them help push the grocery cart, a lot of the work. Or if they're wanting to pick, if you're seeing them like doing a lot of really random pushing of objects over, like a lot of pushing chairs or wanting to climb, like these are some activities that you can do to help bring some more heavy work and to help regulate their body. So laying on your tummy. This is my daughter, Marielle. We do a lot of proprioception activities at home because she is one to constantly move. So instead of just coloring, because we need to work on those fine motor skills of coloring, made her lay on her stomach to color. That's putting pressure on her elbows, on her stomach, on her whole body. So if we're going to do a puzzle, we're going to lay on her stomach to do a puzzle. Does that make sense? We're going to change it just a little bit to help that child regulate their body. When we carry in the groceries, guess who is my helper? Yeah, she's carrying some gallons of milk and gallons of water inside, and she's, at this point she was two years old, and my mom would fuss at me like, that's too heavy for her. She needs it. She needs to do that. Or sometimes I'll say, oh, can you go take that to Daddy? Can you take that to Daddy? He needs that big, heavy gallon of milk. Okay, and then she would do it, and I'm so silly. Can you bring that back in here? We need to put it in the fridge. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm doing that on purpose to make her have to walk and use that heaviness to weigh her body down. You can do that with weighted balls too. You can have them push the balls or carry the balls, or laundry is a good one. Guess who helps me with laundry? She helps me push it to the washing machine. It helps me push it back to the room, so that any type of that heaviness is what we're looking for. And I'm going to load you up again with some ideas. I've got like 3 pages of handouts of categorized ideas for heavy work. So chore activities, being a helper at school, when you're outside, what does it look like when you're using heavy work? So lots of different ideas to help you get those children that are constantly bouncing off the walls and constantly moving and those space invaders, you're gonna bring them down, regulate their bodies by doing a little bit of heavy work. Does anybody have questions about that, the proprioception and heavy work? And okay. So the next one would be vestibular. So this is where this sense tells you that your child is moving and which direction and what speed. So imagine that you are sitting on a swing and you close your eyes and that swing starts moving and you're starting to jerk and like, which way is it gonna move? That's what it feels like when you have a child that has some vestibular sensory challenges, that they don't quite feel where their body is in space. Or have you ever sat down in an office chair and you start to lean back and you do that tilt and all of a sudden you don't know if it's gonna stop or you're gonna flip over? That's what it feels like. Can you imagine that every time you stood up, you started to feel like the ground was moving underneath you? That's what it feels like when your child is having challenges with this specific part of their sensory system. What that may look like is a child that does not like having their diaper changed because you're going from this position to laying them down. It feels like they are falling in space. Even though you're holding them, you're laying them down. If they start screaming, that's what's going on. They can't feel where they're at. They feel like they're in that chair falling. Or children that are on swings. Children, when you put them on an exercise ball, like if they're in therapy and that PT starts to move that exercise ball and they're screaming, it could be because they do not like the feeling of that because they can't feel where they are. Swinging, any type of swinging, maybe hard spinning. These children are ones that you might see are very clumsy. They fall down and trip a lot. I think I cover uncomfortable in elevators. Have you ever seen that? Like your child just like, oh, I don't like the way it moves because you can't see it move. You're just all of a sudden moving and the ground comes up underneath you. I thought that was a little quirky and I did that head tilt. That's different with my daughter. So guess what we do? Every time we go to PT, I'm sure it looks crazy to the other parents because in Blount Memorial Hospital, there's only 2 floors, so we go up the elevator every single time, even though it's on the bottom floor, because I'm helping her acclimate to that sudden change of movement. It looks really weird because we're not going up to dermatology. We are literally every week practicing going on the elevator to get her used to that change in movement. So some sensory activities for this would be helping them acclimate to that, helping them work on the swinging. If your child doesn't like swinging, then maybe we need to try helping them feel a little bit more tight in that space. So you may like the swing where there's a back to it, or maybe they're holding something heavy, or maybe we wrap a weighted blanket around them to help them feel where their body is, so when it starts to move a little bit, they can feel where they are. Rocking chairs, all of these things, like if your child doesn't like a rocking chair, they can sit on your lap while you are in the rocking chair. Give them a real big tight squeeze so they can feel where they are. Dancing and spinning, that may be a child who loves spinning all the time. They like that sensation. That would be a child who is sensory, say it louder, seeking. Yeah, that would be a child who's sensory seeking. What would it look like for a child who's sensory voiding? What? Yes, no, please don't do that. No, I don't like that. Or they start screaming when you try to spin them around. Or if you've done the ride little horsey into town, ride a little horsey, don't fall down. Have you ever done that with your kid and they fall backwards? Ooh, those kids that don't, have some issues with their vestibular system are going to scream the moment you start to lay them back a little bit because they don't know you're going to pull them back up. So we're kind of going to do the opposite. We're going to help them slowly start doing that. Hair washing is another time. A child that has to tilt their head back to get their hair washed, oh, that one's really hard too. So All of these things are things that you can talk to an OT about, that occupational therapist. There's tons of resources out there. I'm going to send you the PowerPoint. You can look through some of these things, but we're going to help them acclimate slowly to some of this. Any of the strategies that we talk about, we're never going to push them. We're never going to force them to do this stuff. We are going to slowly introduce it. We're going to slowly get them used, warm them up a little bit. Tactile. These are the children who, if they are seeking some of those things, they are going to love being messy, love being in shaving cream, love when you put that sunscreen on them, they just love it. You could see them just relax to that. A child who does not like that tactile, that texture on their hands is going to be that kid who doesn't want to touch the food, but is okay with you feeding them or using a fork to feed them. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to play with the bubbles in the water. They don't want to do any of those sorts of activities. So we're going to go over some ideas too. So hates getting dressed. Do we have any kids in here that are so hard to get dressed? Oh my gosh, I feel you. I empathize. Getting dressed is like one of my least favorite things of the whole day because it's such a process. I feel like I have ran a marathon before we've even got to school because it's such an ordeal. I don't want to wear that. I don't like that texture. I don't like the tag in that. I don't want to wear those shoes. They hurt my feet. There's so many different reasons why, but we're going to listen to them, especially if they have that ability to tell us, I don't like that. What is the reason why they don't like it? Is the socks? Because there are some socks out there, by the way, this is really cool, that don't have seams in them, that you can get socks or to turn them inside out too, so you don't feel the seams. But there's lots of different things that we can talk about to help with this. Some activities to help kind of calm and regulate that sensory system. Some of these you're going to be like, oh, no, I'm not finger painting. Absolutely not going to happen. But there are many other ideas that we can do. If you have a child that does not like getting dressed, doing massages before you get them dressed can be very helpful. Putting lotion on their body before they get dressed can be very helpful. Massaging their feet before you get those shoes on, because we want to bring awareness to that area, because once you start touching things, it starts feeling like it's tickling. So if you kind of warm that area of the body up a little bit, it's going to be less stimulating. Kind of like I don't know if anybody here, I don't like vibrating toothbrushes. I feel like it tickles my mouth. I don't like the way it feels in my hand. It feels like it tickles my hand. Some children don't like those things, but if I were to warm my mouth up with maybe some warm liquids and, I would brush my teeth with another toothbrush first, it would almost warm up my mouth a little bit. That's kind of what it feels like too, is that your muscles are kind of cold. You need to warm them up a little bit before you start introducing some of these things. Play-Doh, jumping in a pile of leaves is a really good one because you're getting that texture all over your body. Crawling through textured surfaces, so crawling through the grass, doing an obstacle course outside. Kinetic sand, that's a really weird texture. I don't know if you guys have ever played with the kinetic sand before. If your child is having a hard time doing some of these, we still want to help them slowly acclimate to that. So instead of touching the sand, can you think of something you could do if you wanted them to be a part of the sand, but they don't have to actually touch it? Yeah, use a toy with it, or use a shovel. Have them practice just getting the shovel and pouring it in there, so they're still a part of it, and eventually what they might do is a little bit of the sand might get on their hand as they're pouring it. And we're going to slowly start introducing those things. So if they don't want to touch something, you can give them a tool to touch it with. So if they don't want to touch Play-Doh, we can give them some rollers to do with the Play-Doh, or you could put Play-Doh in a bag and have them squeeze it while it's in the bag. So the whole idea is that we're going to slowly start helping them get used to some of these textures. I took this one out, but I'm going to add it to the resources I send you. But I have a huge list of sensory tables. Is everyone in here familiar with sensory bins, sensory tables, those sorts of things? So I have a huge list, because there's more than just rice and beans and sand and water. There's so many things that you can add to a sensory table, and there's so many things you can put in that sensory table. So a sensory table is basically any type of bin or bucket or something that you can put materials in and help a child play with them and interact with them. It helps calm, a lot of the times this helps calm the sensory system. It's a very calming sensation. So kids that are really revved up and they're having a difficult time concentrating, we may pull out that sensory bin and let them interact with some of those things. I know that we've talked about with my family here that water is something that Silas really loves, is having that water. It calms him. And so when I was talking to his teacher, she was like, he loves to be at the sink and play. Well, maybe that's not appropriate, but how can we bring water into the classroom where it is appropriate? Should we put a little shoe box, one of those little plastic tubs of water in there? Maybe create like a water activity that would be way more appropriate than having to say no all day. Stop, come back. Don't stop going to the sink. Do you see how we're going to slowly start creating some of these activities? If they're seeking that, instead of saying no all the time, maybe we can find a way to redirect them to doing something that's appropriate. If they're seeking it out, then how can we meet that need? Auditory is another one that a lot of times auditory processing can be a very common diagnosis with someone who has sensory processing. So having a challenge with differentiating where sounds are coming from, understanding pitches or tones, or even understanding if someone's speaking in a different language. So a lot of times sensory processing kind of intersects with different types of diagnoses. Auditory would be one of those, having challenges hearing loud noises in public, or a child that's talking really, really loud. A lot of times I'll say, first, let's get a hearing test done to make sure we're not missing something. And then if that comes back and everything is in the normal range, then it's like, okay, maybe there's something else going on. Why are they talking so loud all the time? Why are they so loud? It could be that they're having some auditory sensory challenges. So some of those things, if you have a child that dislikes those loud everyday noises, like the vacuum cleaner, the blender, the helium tank at Party City, there are some things that we can do too, again, to help them regulate and help them calm down. Using noise canceling headphones. Thankfully, in the past 10 years, we have noise canceling headphones for toddlers. That was something very unheard of a decade ago. So we can find those for children that may be overwhelmed and have them, in your car or in your diaper bag in case you get somewhere where it's unexpected, like the 4th of July. That's a lot of times after I come back to a family's home after the 4th of July holiday and they're saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea how much that my child hated loud sounds until we went there, because it was a full-on meltdown. The whole family had to pack up and we had to go back home because it was so overwhelming. That is usually a child that may be way overstimulated from the loud noises. Using rhythmic songs and rhythmic beats is also something that can calm them down. So I love to do the ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah, because it's very rhythmic. It's got a pattern to it, and you can actually control the pace and how slow you're going. And the slower that you go, the slower the breathing happens, the slower the heart rate goes. So if I'm hearing something really, really loud and I finally get out of Walmart on Black Friday, that's my overstimulating, moment. I may need to go to my car and listen to something that's a little bit more calming. I've even had OTs during our sessions use a metronome because it can actually control the tempo that we're doing things in, and we can start to slowly get it a little bit slower and slower to help calm that sensory system. Using a sound machine. I like white noise sound machines. I also recently saw a TikTok about brown noise. Has anybody ever heard of that? It's a little bit, I don't know. Brown noise is also something where, You look it up, write that down. Brown instead of white noise, we always hear that shh, like a scrambled TV. Brown noise is actually, I don't know, it's a little bit calmer. And I did it one time where I was like writing something up and I turned that on. I'm like, wow, that really is calming. That actually does work. TikTok for the win. Okay, visual is also something that can be a little bit dysregulated. Sometimes this is the children that become hyper-focused to their screen. Like if you try to take away that tablet that has Cocomelon on it, oh, you were gonna have a full-on meltdown. I mean, it's to the point where like I would rather not even know that a tablet or a screen exists because it's so overwhelming to take away that screen from them. It's a visual stimulation. I don't know if anybody's ever seen some of those studies about how Cocomelon is a very, very fast-paced show. So they're changing every like 1 to 2 seconds. They're changing scenes. Something is happening where they're changing completely. That's very stimulating to a child that has sensory challenges. They may just, like, again, hyper-focus, and the moment you take that away, it's going to be a major meltdown because that's something that is calming them. If you're going to watch some tablet shows, like you're going to do some screen time, I really suggest Super Simple Songs. It's a huge favorite of mine. It's a lot calmer. They use mixed media in it. Sometimes they'll use puppets. Sometimes it'll be a real person singing. It's very slow. It's a lot calmer. So if you're going to do screen time, that's one that I think is a little bit more calm. Or, Baby Einstein, you see how it's like a really slow transition from one thing to the next. Children who really like that visual stimulation are the children that often stim on things like wheels spinning. Like they'll sit there and just watch that wheel spin, or they love watching a soccer ball. I had a kid that loved a soccer ball, and he would always watch it go because the black and white contrast would change. So there's lots of different ideas of things that you can do if you feel like your child is getting very dysregulated with some visual stimuli, that there's some things that you can kind of redirect them to. Smell is not usually one we talk a lot about. If your child is one, like you might see them smelling everything all the time, like I gotta smell what this smells like, I gotta do this, and I gotta smell this. So there's ways you can do that as well. Maybe those children that love to play in their dirty diaper. I've had some of those kids. That's a very intense, reaction to, I like the texture of fecal matter and I love the way it smells, and so that's not really appropriate. We're going to find another way to redirect them. Maybe having some smelly necklaces. I have a kid that would gag every time he would go to the bathroom because it was so overwhelming, the smell. So we started giving him some oil, what are those called? The oil bracelets. What? Essential oils, thank you. The essential oils, like jewelry. They have like necklaces and bracelets. I even did that when I was pregnant too. Like I would have one and I would sit there and smell it before I would go somewhere because smells overwhelm you. So if that is something that you're seeing, that would be a great idea to redirect them to, is giving them an essential oil, like some part of jewelry to wear. And taste is another one. The kids that constantly love things in their mouth. Chewy necklaces are very big right now. You can find them at, what are the baby, not Babies R Us. Bye Bye Baby, thank you. Bye Bye Baby, yes. You can find those there because they're ones for toddlers. So a lot of times as children grow up and they're toddlers, a lot of, especially like grandparents or teachers or somebody may say, like, take that out of your mouth. You're not a baby anymore. Is there a reason why they're searching for things to put in their mouth? If there is, like maybe putting this choking hazard, toy is not a good idea, but if you're seeking that out and I'm seeing you constantly have your fingers in your mouth and you're, 4 years old, maybe we need to give you a chew necklace to chew on, or some really chewy snacks like, beef jerky. I had a kid that loved beef jerky one time, or really chewy bagels, things that you can put in your mouth that is okay. or eating crunchy pretzels, cold pickles. Those kids that I feel like all these things, as my child was an infant, I wish I would have that was something that probably should have told me. She had sensory challenges, like putting a lemon in her mouth when she was 6 months old, and she was like, you expect that reaction, but a child that's seeking things, especially oral seeking, is going to love lemons. They're going to love limes. They're going to love putting really strong, spicy flavors in their mouth. So some next steps for sensory processing. If this is you and you're like, this is sounding very familiar with my child, then, again, you need to talk to your pediatrician about getting that occupational therapy referral. There are some really great OTs that are specifically for sensory challenges that can just load you up with different types of activities and strategies to use. This is basically like your starter kit for how to help your child, because sensory challenges are also becoming very popular, right? Not popular, increasing, I guess, right now, that OTs are getting kind of overwhelmed because we do have so many children that have sensory needs. So this kind of can be until you get to starting OT, your stuff that you can actually try at home. These are some wonderful resources. If your child has sensory processing, you already know that, you're already in this world right now, I highly recommend this book, The Out of Sync Child. It is the go-to book for sensory challenges. And it is so enlightening to read things about that you had no idea. My child had selective mutism. Didn't know that was a thing. She would become completely mute the moment she walked outside of our house. I had no idea until I read it in this book, and I was able to talk to our team about that and get some services for her to help her kind of branch out of that. So this is a highly recommended book if you are in the sensory processing world right now. And Your Kids Table is my favorite resource that I go to. If you've ever talked to me or been on my caseload, you have probably received some resource from that website. It's free. It's an OT who also specializes in feeding therapy. So there's lots of feeding resources on there as well for your picky eaters. And then any of the other ones, like the OT toolbox, there's tons of handouts on there. Pink oatmeal is a good one. All of those have social media pages, so you can also find them on Facebook, Instagram, or just Google them. And then here's my contact information. So if you have any questions about anything, if I can send you something, I literally have a wealth of resources. If you have something you need, I probably have a resource or handout for you that I can send your way. So if you need something, feel free to email me. And I also have a professional page, Early Intervention DT, on Facebook and on Instagram. So I post stuff a lot about stuff that we try at home. I post other resources, just anything under early intervention, whether it's speech or sensory or trauma or whatever that may be. Feel free to reach out to me if you need anything. And does anybody have any questions? I know I kind of sped through that. Sorry. Yeah.
Sensory processing is not necessarily a recognized diagnosis for insurance or something like
Correct.
that. A lot of times you might be on the autism spectrum disorder, but sometimes maybe not. And it being a neurological impairment, how do you get an actual diagnosis for that so your insurance can start covering something?
That's a good question. So she was asking about diagnoses of, I should add that on there. That's a really good question. How do you get diagnosed with sensory processing? So usually the first person that you talk about those things to is your OT. That'd be the first person I'd bring that up with. So I'm gonna tell you the route that we went. So we talked to OT, we talked about all these challenges that we were having. We went through some of those checklists. If you ever look up the sensory processing disorder checklist, it's also very helpful. If your biological child has sensory processing, there's more than likely someone else in your family who probably has some sensory challenges, and it's also very enlightening to learn those things about yourself or maybe other children that you have. We went through that. I brought that to the doctor. And to get that diagnosis, you do have to have a medical professional diagnose that. So paired with our OT, we went to the pediatrician. I shared all that information with her. They have a diagnosis code, so that is considered a disability, but not under the DSM. So it's more than likely there may be another diagnosis that's paired with that, like you were saying, like autism or prematurity or substance exposure. There may be something else that's paired with that sensory processing, but it's not recognized as a DSM. But to help have insurance pay for things, that's a whole other PowerPoint of how can we get resources for this child to get them to have things paid for, like therapy or equipment. So that's where, like, depending, we can talk sometime, but like Katie Beckett waiver would be something I would talk about. The family support program at Emory Valley. So there's things that we kind of, like, maybe if insurance isn't going to pay for this, then we can go another route with our community resources to help.
Yeah, okay, so I'm with the family support program. But to qualify them for the family support program, we kind of have to have a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And then look for delays in
Mm-hmm.
areas. If somebody's coming in and saying that, they're seeing all these
Yeah.
and then don't have an actual diagnosis, then it's harder for me to approve them. for my
Correct,
program,
okay.
but I can pay for that, and I'm sure Katie Beckett is the same.
I see which, okay.
You have to have a starting
Okay.
point, and then you have to
Yes.
have delays in order to qualify
Yes.
for that funding.
So that's where my job kicks in as being that advocate for that child for because if they're going from TIS and having that IFSP, which is considered a disability through the state, so you could qualify for the family support program, the next step moving after that would be your IEP in the school system. So that's where, if you are currently in TIS, you need to get an advocate. If your child is going through that and there's not another major delay or disability going on that you don't think is going to qualify for an IEP with the school system, you need to make sure you have an advocate there with you going through that next step, where that means the STEP program, which I think is here somewhere. Talking to them about that, having your developmental therapist hold your hand while you go through that process, your service coordinator, you're going to have an advocate, because to say that this child is having a hard time sitting still and all those things, you need to push that and how that's going to affect their education when they transition to that next step, which would be the school system. You want them to be able to qualify for an IEP, to be able to have that diagnosis.
Can we thank Tiffani for amazing
Thank
information?